Every great journey begins with a step. But in God's story, that step is a sacrifice. Not punishment, not payment. The key that unlocks your next chapter. Before you can rise, you must let go. Stay with us until the end to see how sacrifice shapes every life and why modern world leaders fail to keep their promises. We all live by sacrifice, whether we know it or not. Every hour at work is an hour traded for the hope of a better tomorrow. Every time a parent puts their child's needs above their own comfort, that is sacrifice. Every choice to save rather than spend, to study rather than waste time, to serve instead of indulge, these are all sacrifices. Life itself is structured around giving something up for the sake of something better. The Bible captures this law from the beginning. In Genesis 4, Cain brought an offering of his crops, while Abel brought the firstborn of his flock, the very best he had. God regarded Abel's offering, but not Cain's. And then God said to Cain in Genesis 4:7, "If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it." Even before the law, humanity knew, you cannot move forward without sacrifice. And here God warns Cain, the problem is not rejection, but his heart. Sacrifice without sincerity, without cost, without ruling over sin, is an empty gesture. Abel mastered himself. Cain refused, and envy consumed him. Later, God asked Abraham to leave his homeland. "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." Genesis 12:1. It was not simply a change of address. It was leaving security, family, prosperity, and everything familiar behind for a promise unseen. Jordan Peterson calls this humanity's greatest discovery, the realization that the future can be bargained with. Sacrifice now leads to something better later, but it is more than a transaction. It is transformation. What you give up changes you, shapes you, and builds the character that can bear the future you seek. This is why Colossians 3:23 reminds us, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters." Your work is an altar. Whether it is a plow in the field, a hammer in the shop, or a keyboard in an office, what you bring and the spirit you bring it with shapes your life and the lives of those around you. And here is the truth. Life is not about chasing comfort or happiness. It is about responsibility for yourself, for others, for the world God placed in your care. And sacrifice is the first step in that responsibility. If you want to rise, you must let go. Every true leader must sacrifice before they can lead. Abraham left his homeland in obedience. Gideon tore down his father's altar before he could deliver Israel. The apostles dropped their nets, their businesses, their families to follow Christ. For leaders, the ballast is heavier because it's not just about their own weight, it's about the people who follow them. Some leaders cling to power, comfort, and wealth while demanding sacrifice from others. That is a false sacrifice, like Cain's offering, easy to give, costing little, changing nothing. True leadership is costly. It is Abel's altar, offering the best, not the leftovers. Moses turned away from Pharaoh's palace to share the suffering of his people. Hebrews 11:24-25. Esther risked her life before the king to save her nation. Esther 4:16. Nehemiah left the safety of Persia to rebuild the broken walls of Jerusalem. Nehemiah 2:5. And Jesus said, "The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." John 10:11. Leadership is not privilege, it is sacrifice. Real leadership always involves voluntary suffering, not for its own sake, but for the sake of those entrusted to you. If you are not willing to lose reputation, wealth, or safety, you are not leading, you are only preserving yourself. History testifies to this. Winston Churchill spent years in exile and scorn before becoming the voice that carried Britain through its darkest hour. Nelson Mandela gave up 27 years of freedom to stand against apartheid, then chose forgiveness over vengeance when the world expected revenge. Martin Luther King Jr. sacrificed safety, comfort, and ultimately his life to call a nation to justice. And in our own generation, Donald Trump, for all his flaws, sacrificed personal peace and privacy, throwing himself into exhausting conflict and 16-hour days. Yet the question remains, was the sacrifice born for his people or for himself? Angela Merkel, in her moment of decision, opened Germany to millions of refugees. It was an act of compassion, but it cost her political standing and stability across Europe. It showed that sacrifice, even when born of good intent, always reshapes nations. Volodymyr Zelensky could have fled at the first sound of war. Instead, he stayed in Kiev under bombardment, taking on the same risks as his people. That choice inspired a nation. But the story of leadership does not end with one decision. Peace, in any conflict, can only be born of sacrifice. A leader must keep sacrificing, again and again. And here lies the danger. When a leader refuses to lay down personal agendas, the weight of sacrifices shifts back onto the people. It will either be the sacrifice of leaders for their people or the sacrifice of people for their leaders. The lesson is clear. Cain-like leaders make sacrifices that cost them nothing real. Empty gestures, imposed burdens, symbolic offerings. Abel-like leaders bear the cost first and most. They give up security, reputation, freedom, even life, to carry the weight for those they serve. And the question every leader must answer is not, will there be sacrifice? Because sacrifice is inevitable. The real question is, whose sacrifice will it be? Mine or those I lead? And I want to hear from you. What do you think about today's world leaders? Do you agree that the weakness we've seen in the last decades comes from insufficient or even improper sacrifices? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. God has always looked at the heart more than the object. In 2 Samuel 24:24, David said, "I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing." Mary of Bethany poured out perfume worth a year's wages on the feet of Jesus. John 12, verse 3. Others mocked her, but Jesus declared her act would be remembered wherever the gospel was preached. In Mark chapter 12, verses 43 and 44, Jesus pointed to the widow who gave 2 coins. This poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. She, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. These moments reveal the principle. A true sacrifice is not measured by its size, but by its cost to the giver. The object itself is not what God desires. It is what happens inside the soul of the one who offers it. Peterson points out that sacrifice transforms us because it forces us to confront what we worship. If we cannot let go of something, it may already be our God. That is why Cain's offering failed. It was not about crops versus lambs, but about heart versus heart. Cain gave what was convenient. Abel gave what was costly. And this truth extends into our lives today. A leader who cuts his own salary before cutting jobs is making a true sacrifice. A parent who sets aside personal ambition to care for a child offers a sacrifice that reshapes generations. A student who denies easy comfort for disciplined study offers something costly that builds a better future. False sacrifice, giving what doesn't matter, or what costs nothing, is worse than none at all. True sacrifice is giving what matters, willingly, in faith and love. Every redemption story begins with sacrifice. Joseph lost his freedom, his family, and years of his life in prison, but God used it to save nations. Genesis 50:20. Paul gave up reputation, status, and safety, suffering beatings in prison, yet carried the gospel to the Gentiles. 2 Corinthians 11:23. And Jesus, who had the glory of heaven, made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant. Philippians 2, verse 7. His sacrifice was not symbolic, but the act that redefined history. The pattern is always the same: sacrifice, transformation, greater purpose. Meaning comes not from pleasure, but from responsibility. Sacrifice is the proof of responsibility. It is the evidence that you are ready to live for something greater than yourself. And here is the paradox. The more it costs, the freer you become. The more it hurts, the more it makes room for God's power. The prophets, the apostles, the saints, the heroes of history, all began their journey with sacrifice, and so must we. Your life is a journey, and the first step is always the same. Something must be laid down. Not to earn God's love, He already gives that, but to prepare your heart, to lighten your soul, to free your hands for what comes next. What is the weight you carry? What is it that still holds you back? Is it comfort, reputation, wealth, fear, resentment, or pride? Watch our video on sin, what it really means, and how to take aim at the life you were meant for. Every story worth telling begins with sacrifice. Every leader worth following has laid something costly on the altar, and every life worth living is transformed by the same law. When you give your best away, God fills the space with Himself. Your journey is waiting. The altar is before you. The question is not if God will move, but if you are willing to make the first step. Because every great story begins with a sacrifice, and yours begins today. Join us next time as we explore a hidden trap of our age. How adult content affects your life even if you never watch it. If this spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps this message reach others who need it. And join us next time as we explore a hidden trap of our age, how adult content affects